A lost dog returned home. But what it brought with it shocked everyone. What would make a loyal dog leave a warm home and go into the icy hell of a blizzard? Peter Ivanov asked himself this question for the 100th time, staring at the white wall of snow outside the window. For the 3rd day in a row, the wind howled like a hungry beast, uprooting young pine trees and throwing handfuls of prickly snow at the windows. 3 days ago, at the very beginning of this snowy apocalypse, their husky Kai disappeared. The dog, who had never strayed more than 100 meters from home, had simply vanished into the white mist. Peter had found the reason. An old birch tree, unable to withstand the force of the elements, had collapsed onto the chain-link fence, forming a perfect bridge to freedom. Kai, guided by ancient instinct, could not pass up such an opportunity. Peter tried to follow the tracks. He went outside the fence, took 10 steps, and realized it was suicide. The tracks were covered in seconds, and visibility was 0. He returned to the house, gritting his teeth in frustration. His wife Anna silently poured him some hot tea. Her eyes, usually filled with professional veterinary calm, now showed the same anxiety. 10-year-old Misha sat by the window, his forehead pressed against the cold glass, and waited. He had been waiting for 3 days and 3 nights. Hope faded with every passing hour. Peter, a former gamekeeper, knew what the taiga was like in winter. He knew that even for a Siberian husky, 3 days in such a blizzard was almost a death sentence. Wolves, frost, hunger. Any one of these factors could be the last. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. At dawn on the 4th day, the wind died down. A deafening, unnatural silence fell. The world outside the window had turned into a white desert, with the tops of trees sticking out from under the snowdrifts. Peter pulled on his boots, preparing to make another, now hopeless attempt to search. At that moment, he heard a soft scraping sound at the front door. His heart sank and froze. Misha jumped up and threw open the door. Standing on the threshold, barely able to stand on his paws, was Kai. He was thin, emaciated, covered with a crust of ice, but alive. The boy rushed to him, hugging his neck and crying with happiness. Anna and Peter ran into the hallway, not believing their eyes. But the joy lasted exactly 5 seconds, because Kai was not alone. From behind him, timidly stepping forward with tiny paws, something small, dark, and terrified appeared. It looked like a lump of wet earth, but this lump had button ears and shiny black beady eyes. The creature let out a thin, plaintive squeak and tried to hide behind the husky's paw. Misha recoiled. Anna pressed her hand to her mouth, and Peter, a man who had seen everything in the forest, froze like a pillar of salt. Because right on the threshold of their house, trembling with cold and fear, stood a tiny bear cub, barely 2 months old. The first to recover from the shock was not a human. Kai, swaying with fatigue, took a step into the warm house. The bear cub immediately squealed desperately and waddled after him. The dog stopped, turned around, and nudged its strange companion gently with its nose as if to encourage it. The entire Ivanov family watched this silent scene in silence. The shocking truth hit them with the inevitability of an avalanche. This wild, dangerous animal had not just come with their dog. It had followed her. It trusted her. Anna, as a veterinarian, was the first to assess the situation from a professional point of view. She stepped forward slowly so as not to scare it. The cub hissed like a kitten and hid behind Kay. The husky growled in response, looking straight at its owner, not threateningly, but warningly. "Don't touch it. It's mine." Anna stopped. "Petya, it's dying," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the little creature. "Look, it's dehydrated and severely malnourished." Peter was silent. His former gamekeeper's brain feverishly ran through the options, each one worse than the last. Call the forestry department? The cub would most likely be put down, or sent to a cramped zoo enclosure, where it would waste away without its mother. Leave it here? That was illegal, and deadly dangerous. Today it was a ball of fur, but in a year it would be an unpredictable predator weighing 100 pounds. "Dad, who's that?" whispered Misha, hiding behind his father's back. "This is trouble, son," Peter replied hoarsely. "This is big, big trouble." Kay, as if realizing that his fate was being decided, took another step and lay down on the rug in the hallway, completely exhausted. The bear cub immediately crawled over to him, curled up in a ball against his warm belly, and fell silent, only occasionally shivering. The decision was made without words. Anna brought a baby bottle from her veterinary first aid kit and mixed a special milk formula for puppies. She approached the sleeping pair. Kai opened one eye, but did not move. Anna carefully held the bottle out to the bear cub. At first, he did not understand what was happening, but then instinct took over. He greedily latched onto the nipple, purring with pleasure. Peter watched the scene in silence, his pragmatism cracking. He didn't see a future predator in front of him, just a hungry child. "All right," he said finally. "Let's get out of here. We'll figure it out later." Those words were the point of no return. They hadn't just taken in a wild animal. They had accepted a secret that could destroy their lives. Peter carried Kay into the large room, closer to the fireplace. He had to carry the bear cub with him. It had clung to the dog's fur and wouldn't let go. They slept almost the entire first day. Kai regained his strength, and his charge, whom Misha immediately christened Kroha, slept off the horror he had experienced. Anna fed Kroha from a bottle every 3 hours. The bond between the dog and the bear cub was incredible. Kroha copied everything Kai did. If the husky drank water, the bear cub would stick his snout in the same bowl. If Kai got up and went to another corner of the room, Kroha would hobble after him, stumbling and squeaking. He clearly considered the big, warm, and fluffy dog to be his mother. And Kai, in turn, accepted this role. He licked Kroha, warmed him with his body, and growled at anyone who, in his opinion, came too close or too abruptly. On the second day, Peter took action. He realized that keeping a bear in the house was madness. He cleared out an old woodshed, insulated it with hay, and reinforced the door. It was a temporary solution, a flimsy shelter, but better than nothing. Relocating became a real problem. As soon as Peter tried to pick up Kroha, Kai jumped up, bared his teeth, and stood between him and the cub. This was his dog, his faithful friend. But now his blue eyes burned with the cold fire of his wild ancestor. Peter had to resort to trickery. He lured Kay into the shed with a piece of meat, and Kroha, of course, followed. As soon as they were inside, Peter quickly closed the door with a heavy bolt. Immediately, the indignant growl of the dog and the plaintive squeak of the bear cub could be heard from behind the door. "It's for the best," Peter said to himself. But his heart was heavy. He felt like a traitor. That evening, Anna returned from the city. She had gone to her clinic, supposedly to get medicine for Kay. In fact, she brought back several large packages of milk formula and special vitamins. I said that some farmer friends of mine had a dog that had given birth to puppies that needed to be bottle-fed. She explained to her husband. Lying came hard to her. Every time she looked into the eyes of her neighbors in the village, she felt as if she had, "We're hiding a bear," written on her forehead. The Ivanov family's life turned into a spy thriller. Every knock on the door, every snowmobile passing by made them flinch. A day later, when the snow had settled a little, Peter decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to know where Kai had brought Kroha from and what had happened to his real mother. He put on his hunting skis, took his rifle, not for hunting, but for protection, and called Kai. The dog, released from the shed, was initially delighted to be out for a walk. Peter did not tie him up. He simply said, "Show me where you've been." And Kai understood. He trotted confidently to the hole in the fence and disappeared into the forest. Peter followed him. The forest greeted him with ringing silence and dazzling whiteness. Peter followed the trail for about 2 hours. Kai led him deeper and deeper into the taiga, to a place where even hunters rarely ventured. Finally, the dog stopped at the foot of a large cedar tree, its roots torn out by a storm. Between the roots was a black hole, a den. Peter approached. The snow was trampled down near the entrance. This was where Kai had spent those 3 terrible days. He hadn't just found the cub. He had lived with it in the abandoned den while the blizzard raged. But where was the mother? Peter began to search the area. Almost immediately, he found what he was looking for. Deep tracks in the snow made by a huge bear. They led from the den toward a rocky ravine. But there was something else. 2 clear tracks from a snowmobile crossed the bear tracks. Peter's heart sank. He followed the snowmobile tracks and came across some bullet casings. Poachers. The picture began to become clearer. They had been hunting an animal, most likely a moose or a wild boar. The noise of the snowmobile and the gunshots had scared the bear away from her den. In a panic, she ran away, leaving her cub behind. Then a blizzard hit, covering all traces and scents. The bear simply couldn't find her way back. But that meant the worst. A bear awakened in the middle of winter and deprived of its offspring turns into a raving mad beast. The most dangerous and unpredictable beast in the taiga. Hungry, angry, and crazed, he would roam the forest, attacking everything in sight. And sooner or later, he would come out to the people. Everyone knew each other in the village of Sosnovka. News spread faster than a forest fire here. And the main news of the last few days was the unprecedented cold spell and rumors. First, an old hunter named Semyonik returned from the forest and told the village store that he had seen footprints as big as basins. No one believed him, attributing it to his age and the moonshine he had drunk to keep warm. But then the forester's dog disappeared from the distant border. And yesterday, someone ransacked the trash cans on the outskirts of the village at night. It wasn't the work of a dog, but of some monstrous force that scattered the heavy metal containers like matchboxes. A sense of alarm began to hang in the frosty air. And there was a man in the village who listened to these conversations with particular interest. His name was Victor. Officially, he didn't work anywhere, getting by with odd jobs. But everyone knew that his real trade was poaching. Victor was a man without conscience or fear, for whom the taiga was just a source of income. It was he and his partner who had driven the moose onto the snowmobile a couple of days ago. He remembered how a huge bear had rushed out from under a cedar tree. They hadn't bothered her then. They didn't have a license, and they didn't want to mess with the carcass. But now that rumors of the Shatun were spreading, the situation had changed. The Shatun's skin was highly prized. and its bile was even more valuable. Victor began to gather information. He was observant, and he noticed something strange about the Ivanovs' behavior. He noticed how Anna secretly brought a huge box from the city. He noticed how Peter, a former gamekeeper who knew the forest like the back of his hand, suddenly started locking his dog in the shed every evening. And at night, strange squeaks that didn't sound like a dog could sometimes be heard coming from the shed. Victor started putting two and two together. The she-bear had escaped from the den. What if she hadn't run away alone? What if someone was still in the den? Victor decided to check his hunch. Under cover of night, he crept up to the Ivanovs' property. He climbed a tree on the border of their land and took out an old army binoculars. He didn't have to wait long. The door of the house opened, and Anna came out onto the porch with a bowl in her hands. She walked over to the shed, pushed the bolt aside, and went inside. Through a crack in the wall, Victor saw something incredible. Husky Kai was lying on the hay, and next to him was a small bear cub, greedily lapping warm milk from the bowl. Victor's eyes lit up with greed. This was the jackpot. He didn't just have a bear cub in his hands, he had the perfect bait. Live bait that the grief-stricken mother would come for herself. Straight into his trap. The next day, he went to the Ivanovs' house. Without knocking or warning, he simply walked through the gate when Peter came out into the yard to clear the snow. "Good afternoon, neighbors," Victor said with a crooked smile. "I hear you have a new addition to the family?" Peter tensed up. He immediately realized that this was not a friendly visit. "What are you talking about?" he asked coldly. Victor nodded toward the shed. "Come on, Peter. I know everything. You have a circus in there. The dog is babysitting the bear. I could report you to the authorities. Can you imagine the fine? They could even take away your gun license. And anyway, keeping a wild animal, that's a criminal offense." Peter clenched his fists. "What do you want, Victor?" he hissed. Victor's grin widened. "I don't want anything. I just want to help. They say his mother is wandering around here, scaring people. She's a dangerous animal. She needs to be taken care of. And your little bear cub would be very helpful in that matter. Give him to me for a couple of days. I'll take care of the problem with the connecting rod, and you'll have peace and quiet. And I'll forget what I saw." The threat was direct and unambiguous. Victor was offering Peter to become an accomplice to a crime, to use a living creature as bait. Peter looked into the poacher's insolent eyes and realized they were trapped. He couldn't give up Kroha. But refusing Victor meant setting off a chain of events that could end in disaster for everyone. "Get out!" Peter's voice was quiet, but it rang with metal. He took a step forward, and his strong, solid figure seemed to grow, blocking the view of the house. Victor did not back down, but his insolent grin faltered slightly. He saw something in the former gamekeeper's eyes that he had not seen in the eyes of other people in the village. Cold, calm rage. "I wouldn't get so worked up if I were you, Ivanov," the poacher said. "You see, this she-bear isn't stupid. She's looking for her cub. Sooner or later she'll find it. And when she does, you know who's going to be blamed? Not me. It'll be the one who hid a wild animal in his yard. Think about it, Peter. You have until tomorrow evening." He turned and, without looking back, strode away, leaving a trail of dirty footprints in the clean snow. Peter watched him until he disappeared behind the trees. The cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was something dirty and sticky, like a taiga swamp, bursting into his orderly, well-organized life. And this swamp was beginning to suck them in. He entered the house. Anna immediately understood everything from his face. She approached him silently and took his hand. "Was that Victor?" she asked quietly. Peter nodded. He sat down on a chair in the kitchen and rubbed his face wearily with his palms. "He knows? He knows everything. He saw Kroha." Anna gasped, fear mixed with anger in her eyes. "What does he want? Money?" "Worse." Peter looked up at her with a heavy gaze. "He wants Kroha. As bait. He's going to hunt the she-bear." Silence hung in the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. Misha, who was sitting in his room doing his homework, heard snatches of the conversation. He didn't understand the word bait, but he understood that they were talking about Kroha, and that some scary man named Victor wanted to take him away. The little boy's heart sank with fear. He quietly opened the door and listened. "He won't get him," Anna said firmly. There was not a shadow of doubt in her voice. She was a veterinarian. She had sworn to protect and save. "No way. We'll call the police, the forest rangers." "And what will we tell them, Anna?" Peter smiled bitterly. "Tell them we've been keeping a bear in our house illegally for 3 days. The first thing they'll do is confiscate Kroha and put him down. And they'll fine us so much we'll have to sell the house. Victor understands this perfectly well. He's got us cornered." The next morning, the world seemed deceptively calm. The bright winter sun flooded everything around, making the snow sparkle like millions of diamonds. But this beauty no longer brought joy. It seemed cold and indifferent. The Ivanov family moved around the house like shadows, speaking in whispers. The sword of Damocles, in the form of Victor's ultimatum, hung over them. And with each passing hour, it descended lower and lower. When Anna went to feed Kroha, she noticed a change. The cub had grown stronger. He was no longer just lying next to Kai. He was playing energetically, clumsily attacking his adoptive father's tail. His claws, though tiny, were already sharp. While playing, he caught an old galvanized bucket standing in the corner, and it rolled across the wooden floor with a clatter. Anna shuddered at the loud noise. Kai immediately jumped up and stood over Kroha, growling softly. He was protecting him. Anna realized that Peter was right. This was not a toy. This was a wild animal, and his instincts were awakening. She handed Kroha the bottle, and he, forgetting about his games, greedily latched onto it. But even while eating, he tried to hold the nipple not only with his mouth, but also with his paws, demonstrating strength that he did not have yesterday. "He's growing by the hour," she said to Peter when she returned to the house. "The barn won't hold him for long." News arrived in the village in the afternoon. Alarming news. The driver of a logging truck who was driving along a remote forest road had seen her. A female bear. He said she had jumped out onto the road, huge and disheveled. She stopped, looked at the truck with burning eyes, and disappeared back into the thicket. But that wasn't the worst of it. During the night, someone had destroyed the hunter's winter hut 10 kilometers from Sosnovka. The door, made of thick logs, had been torn out along with the frame. Inside, everything had been turned upside down. The bear had been looking for food. Panic began to spread through the village. People were afraid to let their children out onto the streets. The head of the administration called Peter. "Peter Semyonovich, you're an experienced man. What should we do? Gather the hunters and organize a manhunt?" Peter stood with the phone in his hand and felt cold sweat running down his back. He, like no one else, knew the reason for this chaos. The reason was sleeping in his barn. "No roundup," he replied, struggling to find the right words. "You'll only make things worse. If you corner the animal, it will become even more aggressive. We just have to wait it out. Don't leave any food outside and keep the livestock locked up." Once the frosts are over, it will find a new den and lie low. He hung up, knowing he was lying. Shatun wouldn't settle down. He would wander until he found what he was looking for, or until he was killed, or until he killed someone else. Evening was approaching. Peter realized that there was no help coming. He would have to solve the problem himself. And there was only one way to solve it correctly. Not the way Victor had suggested, but the way his conscience told him to. He went to his garage, which also served as his workshop. There, in a metal safe, he kept his old hunting equipment. He took out a gun, but not a hunting rifle. It was a special gun for injections that Anna used for large animals. He checked the mechanism and found ampules with a strong sleeping pill. Then he took a flare gun and several signal cartridges out of the box. On an old map of the area, he began to plot a route. From their house to that very ruined den. He had to take Kroha back there. It was a crazy, desperate plan. Put the cub to sleep, load him onto a sled, attach it to a snowmobile, and take him to the forest at night, without anyone knowing. He hoped that the mother, who was searching the area, would find him by his scent. It was their only chance. A chance to save Kroha, save the bear from the poacher's bullet, and save his family. The risk was enormous. If the sleeping pill didn't work, if they ran into the bear on the way, if Victor saw them, too many ifs. But the alternative was even worse. It was getting dark. The tension in the house was almost palpable. Misha sat as quiet as a mouse. Anna went to the window several times, peering into the dark line of the forest. Peter finished his last preparations. He rolled out the snowmobile, attached a small cargo sled to it, and lined it with an old blanket. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait until late at night, when the entire village was asleep. He stood on the porch, breathing in the frosty air and trying to calm his wildly beating heart. At that moment, Kai, who was inside the house, suddenly growled. Not like he had growled in the barn, protecting Kroha. This was a different growl, hollow, guttural, full of hatred. He rushed to the door leading to the yard and began to bark furiously, scratching at the wood with his claws. Peter grabbed the most powerful lantern he had and stepped off the porch. "Quiet, Kai, quiet," he commanded. The dog wouldn't calm down. Peter directed the beam of the lantern where Kai was looking, at the edge of their property, where a thick spruce forest began. At first, he saw nothing. Only black tree trunks and white, untouched snow. He moved the beam further along the fence. Suddenly, the light caught something unnatural in the darkness. Something metallic, glinting ominously in the light of the flashlight. Peter froze. Right by their fence, about 20 meters from the gate, a large steel trap was skillfully camouflaged in the snow. And above it, on a low fir branch, a dark piece of meat swung on a piece of twine. The message was crystal clear. Victor didn't wait for nightfall. He got down to business. He set his traps. And the bait hanging above the trap was the last warning, or even an invitation. An invitation for the hungry beast to come closer to the Ivanovs' house. The blood drained from Peter's face. This was no longer just a threat. It was a direct act of aggression, putting his entire family in mortal danger. Anyone could accidentally fall into this trap. Misha, who had run out to play. Anna, walking to the barn. Himself, even Kai. Rage overwhelmed him with such force that his vision darkened for a second. He wanted to rush there, break the trap with his bare hands, and go to Victor's house to beat the rot out of him. But he forced himself to stop. Emotions were a poor advisor, especially now. That was exactly what Victor was waiting for Peter to lose his temper and make a mistake. No, He had to act coolly and deliberately. He returned to the house, closing the door tightly behind him. Anna, Misha, don't let anyone go out into the yard. Under no circumstances. Do you understand? His voice was as hard as steel and brooked no argument. Anna saw his face and understood without a word. What's going on? She whispered. A trap, right by the fence. Victor has set traps. The deadline had not yet expired. This meant that Victor was most likely sitting somewhere in ambush, watching, waiting. He was waiting for the Ivanovs to panic, get scared, and hand him the bear cub on a silver platter. Peter went into his room and looked out the window facing the other side of the property, at the old road leading deep into the forest. No signs, no movement. But he felt someone watching him. He could feel it in his skin. It was an old hunter's instinct that had saved his life many times in the taiga. Plan A, taking Kroha to the den, was becoming deadly dangerous. Victor could set up an ambush anywhere along the way. He could shoot them, mistaking them for a bear. Or he could just wait for them at the den. Something had to change. But what? The situation seemed hopeless. They were under siege. On one side was a ruthless poacher. On the other was a crazed wild beast roaming somewhere nearby. And between them was the family, trying to protect not only themselves, but also the little creature that, by a twist of fate, had become the cause of this whole nightmare. Suddenly the lights went out in the house. Complete, absolute darkness enveloped the rooms. Misha cried out in surprise. "Calm down." Peter's voice rang out in the darkness. "It's just a blown fuse. It happens because of the cold." He said this to calm his son, but his mind was elsewhere. Victor. Could he have cut the wires? No, that would be too difficult and noisy. Most likely, it really was an accident. But the sudden darkness and silence only served to heighten the atmosphere of fear. Peter found a lantern on the shelf and lit the candles. Their dim light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, turning the familiar house into a cave full of ghosts. And in the echoing silence, they heard a new sound, a screech, a loud, drawn-out screech of metal against wood. It came from the yard. Peter rushed to the window, Anna behind him. In the moonlight, filtering through the clouds, they saw it. A huge dark shadow loomed over their fence. It wasn't climbing over, it was breaking it. With monstrous, primitive strength, the shadow bore down on the wooden posts, which cracked and gave way like matchsticks. It was her, the she-bear. She had come. Instinct. As old as the world itself, maternal instinct had led her here. She was following the faint, barely perceptible scent of her cub, which the wind carried to her from the chimney of the Ivanovs' house. She was not angry with the people. She did not think about them at all. In her frantic mind, there was only one thought, one goal: to find what she had lost. At that moment, all hell was breaking loose in the barn. Hearing his mother's roar, Kroha woke up. He couldn't see her, but he could feel her. He began to rush around the small space, scratching at the door with his paws and letting out a piercing, desperate squeak. It was a call that his mother could not ignore. Kai heard it too. He heard the roar of a huge beast behind the fence. He felt the panic of his little charge, and his dog's soul was torn apart. On the one hand, there was his instinct for self-preservation, which told him to hide in the farthest corner and not breathe. On the other hand, there was his protective instinct. He had to protect his pack. And now his pack was in mortal danger. The ones outside, the ones in the house, and the one rushing around next to him in the darkness of the shed. "To the basement, quick!" Peter commanded. His voice cracked, but it was filled with a will that forced Anna and Misha to move. He literally pushed them toward the hatch, leading to a small cellar. "Stay there and don't stick your heads out, no matter what happens." He slammed the heavy hatch cover shut, leaving his family in relative safety, and rushed into the hallway. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit there and wait for the bear to tear his house apart. He grabbed the rifle with the sleeping pills. This was his only chance. One shot. If he hit it, they would have a few hours to decide what to do next. If he missed, he tried not to think about the consequences. There was a deafening crash. The fence had given way. The huge body of the bear rolled over the debris and ended up in the yard. It stopped, sniffing, turning its massive head from side to side. Its nostrils flared, catching the scent. And that scent led it to the barn. Inside the house, Kai made a decision. He couldn't listen to Kroka's desperate squeaks and the threatening roars outside any longer. He gathered all his strength, tensed his muscles, and threw himself at the flimsy barn door. One blow, then another. The old wood creaked. Peter, pressed against the wall by the window, saw everything as if in a terrible dream. He saw the she-bear slowly, deliberately moving toward the barn. He raised his rifle, trying to aim at the massive body, but it was constantly moving, and the moonlight provided too little illumination. He was afraid of missing and only angering the beast even more. Then the barn door burst into splinters. A gray-white whirlwind flew out of the dark opening. It was Kai. He didn't attack. He did something unimaginable. He jumped in front of the bear and began to bark, not viciously, but somehow demanding. He circled around the huge beast, not letting it approach the barn, but not coming too close either. He was distracting it. He was buying time. The bear was taken aback by such insolence for a second. She stopped and let out a low, guttural roar that made the windows rattle. She lunged at Kay, but the dog easily dodged her and continued his furious dance. He was a small, brave warrior who had challenged the elements. And at that moment, Crow rolled out of the broken barn door, stumbling and squeaking. He saw a huge dark figure, heard a familiar roar, and smelled a familiar scent. And he ran. He ran straight to her. The scene that unfolded next was forever etched in Peter's memory. Time seemed to slow down. The huge bear froze when she saw her cub running toward her. She stopped paying attention to Kay's barking, to the house, to everything around her. She took a few steps toward him, lowered her huge head, and nudged the little ball of fur with her nose. The cub immediately snuggled up to her, trying to crawl under her warm belly. The reunion was complete. The maternal instinct that had brought her here was satisfied. The rage and hunger that had driven her to destruction faded away. She had found what she was looking for. She gently nudged the little one with her nose, turning toward the broken fence and the safety of the forest. Her mission here was complete. Seeing this, Kai stopped barking. He simply sat down in the snow and watched them go, breathing heavily. His mission was also complete. He had saved everyone, those he loved, and the one he had come to love. And at that very moment, when it seemed that the nightmare was over, a sharp metallic click rang out from the darkness of the pine forest, followed by a wild, inhuman cry of pain. Peter spun around. The beam of his flashlight darted in the direction of the cry, and he caught the figure of a man struggling in the snow. His leg was caught in the steel teeth of the very trap he had set himself. It was Victor. Attracted by the noise and roar, he had decided to get closer to take his shot. In his haste, he had fallen into his own trap. Victor's scream was cut off. turning into a hoarse, strangled growl. He rolled around in the snow, trying to free his leg from the steel grip, but the trap's teeth only dug deeper into his flesh. The bear, already preparing to leave, froze and turned at the sound. She let out another low, threatening roar. Now she saw a new threat. A man, screaming, reeking of fear and pain. Peter realized that something irreparable was about to happen. The bear, who had just calmed down, could attack Victor to protect her cub. He had to intervene, not for the sake of the poacher who deserved his fate, but so that this bloody story could finally come to an end. "Back! Go away!" Peter shouted with all his might, jumping out onto the porch. He didn't aim. He fired the flare gun into the air. A bright red star whistled into the night sky, momentarily illuminating the entire yard with an eerie, bloody light and deafening everyone with a loud bang. That was enough. Frightened by the sharp sound and light, the she-bear grabbed Kroha by the scruff of his neck like a kitten and leaped over the ruins of the fence in one powerful bound. A second later, two dark shadows disappeared into the safety of the forest. They were gone. Silence fell again in the yard. Only now it was broken not by the roar of a beast, but by Victor's moans and curses. Peter slowly approached him. In the light of the lantern, he saw that the poacher's trouser leg was soaked with blood. "Help. Ivanov, take this junk off," Victor croaked, looking up at Peter with eyes full of pain and hatred. Two feelings fought inside Peter. The desire to turn around and leave him here to freeze, and duty, human duty. He crouched down and examined the mechanism. The trap was powerful. Like a bear trap, it would take considerable strength and a special tool to release the springs. "I can't remove it by myself," Peter concluded. He returned to the house and opened the hatch to the basement. "Anya, it's over. Come out. Misha, stay with your mother." Anna, pale, her eyes wide with terror, came upstairs. "The bears," she began. "They're gone. You're alive. But Victor needs help." She was a veterinarian. She was a doctor. Hearing that someone needed help, she grabbed her medical bag without hesitation. Together they returned to the yard. Anna examined the wound. "It's broken, probably open. He's losing a lot of blood." She gave him a painkiller and applied a tourniquet above the wound to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, Peter brought 2 crowbars from the garage. It was hard work. The trap springs were tight, and their hands were numb from the cold. But together, wedging the crowbars into the mechanism, they were able to compress the springs just enough for Victor, groaning in pain, to pull out his shattered leg. He immediately lost consciousness. "We have to take him to the hospital, or he'll die from blood loss or shock," Anna said, quickly applying a splint to the wound. Peter nodded. He hooked the sled to the snowmobile, the same sled he had planned to use to take Kroha. A surreal twist of fate. Together with Anna, they loaded Victor's unconscious body into the sled and covered him with a blanket. "I'll take him. You call the emergency services and the police. Tell them everything that happened. About the bear cub, the blackmail, the traps. We have nothing left to hide." Anna looked at him anxiously. "Petya, are you going to be all right?" He smiled bitterly. "I don't know, but it's the right thing to do." He started the snowmobile, and it roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. Glancing back one last time at his house, at the light in the window where his family was waiting for him, Peter steered the vehicle down the snow-covered road, taking his enemy to safety. The investigation was long and painful. The police arrived, along with investigators and forest rangers. Peter and Anna had to give statements several times, describing in detail every day since Kai's return. The story sounded so incredible that at first they were not believed. But the evidence was irrefutable. The ruined den, the snowmobile tracks, the shell casings, the broken fence and shed, and most importantly, Victor's own testimony. When he came to in the hospital, with his leg in a cast and facing criminal charges for poaching and illegally setting traps, he decided that the best defense was to go on the offensive. He accused the Ivanovs of everything. He claimed that they had stolen the bear cub to sell it, and he, as a conscientious citizen, tried to stop them. But his lies were transparent. Investigators quickly found his partner, who, frightened by the responsibility, confessed everything. He told them about the moose hunt and the frightened bear. Victor's case fell apart, turning into a case against him. In the end, the Ivanov family was not punished. Officially, their actions were recognized as having been committed in extreme circumstances. The story was reported in the local press, and public opinion was entirely on their side. They were called heroes who had saved the village from a bear. But the Ivanovs themselves did not feel like heroes. They were just a family who had found themselves in an impossible situation and tried to do the right thing. Life slowly returned to normal. Peter repaired the fence, reinforcing it so that even the strongest animal could not break it. Anna returned to her job at the clinic. Misha went to school where he became a real celebrity, telling everyone the incredible story of his dog. But something had changed. They had all changed. They had gone through fear and despair, and it had brought them closer together. They realized how fragile their peaceful life could be, and how important it was to remain human in any situation. Kai changed the most. He became more serious, calmer. He no longer tried to run away into the forest. He would sit on the porch for hours, staring at the dark wall of trees as if waiting for someone. In the first days after that night, he whimpered, quietly, plaintively, almost humanly. He was looking for his little, clumsy charge. He sniffed around the empty shed, the place in the yard where the bear had taken Kroha. Seeing his longing, Misha tried to spend all his free time with him. He hugged the dog, stroked his thick fur, and whispered in his ear, "It's okay, Kai. You're a good boy. You saved everyone." And the dog, as if understanding him, licked his hand gratefully. His boundless devotion to his family grew even deeper, even more meaningful. He was not just a dog. He was the guardian of this house, this little island of safety in a vast and wild world. He had learned something greater than dog loyalty. He had learned about a father's love and the bitterness of loss. Several weeks passed. Winter began to recede. The sun grew warmer every day, and the first grass of last year appeared on the thawed patches of ground. One Sunday, Peter, Anna, and Misha went for a walk in the woods with Kai. They walked along a familiar path, enjoying the silence and the fresh spring air. They climbed a small hill, which offered a view of a wide valley and distant mountain slopes still covered with snow. Peter took out his binoculars to admire the landscape. He slowly moved the lens along the horizon. Suddenly, he froze. "Look," he said quietly, handing the binoculars to Anna. She put the eyepieces to her eyes. There, far, far away, on a sunlit, snowy slope, two dark spots were moving. One was large, the other very small. The small dot was clumsily tumbling in the snow, attacking the large one. The large one was patiently and indulgently playing with it. It was them, the mother bear and the cub. They had survived. They were together. They were home. Kai, standing next to him, suddenly raised his head. He couldn't see them from such a distance, but he seemed to sense something. He let out a quiet, long howl. But there was no longer any longing in that howl. There was something else. Farewell, acceptance, and boundless peace. He was sending his adopted son off to his real life. And now he too was truly home, next to his pack. Misha took his father's hand, looking where the binoculars showed two tiny dots. He didn't fully understand the depth of what had happened, but he felt that something very important had come to an end. The secret that had lived in their home had returned to the forest, where it belonged. "Dad, does Kroha remember us?" he asked quietly. Peter lowered his binoculars and looked at his son. "I don't know, son. Maybe. But that's not important. The important thing is that he's alive and with his real mother. And we helped him do that." Anna hugged them both. The three of them, along with their faithful dog, stood on top of the hill, watching the sun sink behind the taiga hills. The shock of Kay's return was replaced by the realization of the miracle they had witnessed and participated in. This was not a story about fear, but about courage. It was not about hatred, but about the incredible bond between beings who seemed to have nothing in common. It was a story about how even in the wildest and harshest of nature, there is room for compassion and love. And about how sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. A year passed. Life in Sosnovka went on as usual. Victor, having received a suspended sentence and lifelong lameness, sold his house and left the village. No one heard from him again. Rumors about the bears died down, turning into a local legend told to visiting tourists around the campfire. For the Ivanov family, that winter remained a vivid, disturbing flash in their memory. They often remembered Kroha, but now without pain, only with a gentle sadness. Misha grew up, becoming more serious and responsible. He understood the main lesson of that story. Wild nature is beautiful and amazing, but it must be respected and kept at a distance. His friendship with Kay became unbreakable. They understood each other without words. The dog grew old, wisdom appeared in his blue eyes, and an expression of noble calmness froze on his gray muzzle. He was a living legend of their family. One day the following winter, Peter and Misha went skiing in the forest again. They decided to go to the very cedar tree where the den had once been. The place had changed a lot. The upturned roots were covered with snow, and only a small depression reminded them that such passions had once raged here. They stood in silence for a while and were about to head back when suddenly Kai, who was running ahead, stopped and froze, raising his head. He growled softly, looking into the thicket. Peter tensed, his hand reaching for the flare gun he now always took with him into the forest. "What is it, Kai?" he whispered. It appeared from behind the thick fir trees. A huge brown bear. She was alone. She stood about 50 meters away and just stared at them. There was no aggression in her gaze. Was it recognition? Curiosity? Peter slowly raised his hand to show that he had no weapon. The bear stood there for a few more seconds, then let out a quiet, guttural sound, not like a growl, but more like a sigh. She turned and disappeared just as silently into the forest. Peter and Misha stood there for a long time, unable to move. What was that? Gratitude? A warning? Just a coincidence? They would never know. But when they turned to go home, they saw something in the snow where the bear had been standing. They approached cautiously. On the clean white snow, as if left as a gift, lay a piece of an old baby bottle with a bitten nipple. It was the very bottle from which Anna had fed Kroha and which he had taken with him on that terrible night. It couldn't have been a coincidence. It was a sign, the answer to all their questions, a sign that their deed had not been forgotten. that somewhere out there, deep in the endless taiga, the heart of a beast that remembered kindness was beating. Peter picked up the piece of plastic. He looked at it, and for the first time in a long time, a smile appeared on his weather-beaten, stern face. They returned home, and above the snow-covered taiga, a new sun rose, promising a new day. Which decision made by the Ivanov family do you consider the most controversial, and why? The decision to keep the bear cub, the plan to return it to the forest, or the call to the police after everything that happened?